The story starts in America. A place where many African people dream to reach. A place where money look plenty, and opportunities look big. For many Africans, the idea is always simple: go to America, study, get a good job, and never come back. But for this small group of African nurses, the story didn't follow that normal path. They were young. Some from Burkina Faso, some from other West African countries, but all of them had one thing in common: they had traveled far, crossed oceans, and studied nursing in United States of America. They faced hard life as students. They worked in restaurants, cleaned offices, did security jobs, all just to pay school fees. Some of them even slept 2 or 3 inside one small room to save money. Life was not easy, but they carried one big dream: to become professional nurses. After many years, they finally graduated. They wore the white uniforms, the nursing caps, and they felt proud. Families back home celebrated. Parents cried for joy because their children had made it. America itself noticed them. Hospitals, clinics, and even the government under President Donald Trump looked at these young Africans and said, "Yes, we need them. Give them jobs. Give them green cards. Let them work for us." The offers came. Big salaries, health insurance, cars, and houses. Everything that many Africans run to America for was standing in front of them. For some of their friends, there was no thinking twice. The American dream was too sweet to reject. But this particular group of nurses felt something different inside. At night, when the cities of America were shining with lights, when everyone around them was celebrating that they had arrived, these nurses could not sleep well. Their hearts were heavy. They remembered home. They remembered the villages with no hospital. They remembered mothers dying while giving birth because no nurse was there to help. They remembered children coughing, burning with fever, but no medicine, no injection, nothing. Every time they looked at the job offers, they also saw the faces of their people back in Africa. Poor faces, hungry faces, faces waiting for help. One of them even said in simple words, "If I stay here, I will be rich. But if I go back, maybe I will save lives." Which one is better? That question was not small. It shook all of them. Because in truth, many people talk about loving Africa, but when the money and comfort appear, they forget. These nurses refused to forget. Days turned to weeks. People told them they were crazy. How can you reject America? Do you know how many people are begging for this chance? Do you know how many Africans will die to be in your shoes? You want to throw away everything. The pressure was high. Some even insulted them. Some family members were angry, saying, "You suffered so much, you studied, you made it, and now you want to waste it. Who will take care of us if you don't work in America?" But the nurses stood strong. They told their families one thing: we did not study to only save American lives. We studied to save African lives too. That single sentence carried fire. It carried pain, but also carried pride. Then the moment of decision came. Contracts were ready. Signatures were needed. But one after the other, they refused. They put down the pen. They said no to the jobs. No to the American dream. No to the soft life that everybody was chasing. Instead, they booked tickets. Their destination was not London, not New York, not Los Angeles. Their destination was Burkina Faso. It was not an easy decision. On the day of the flight, as they packed their bags, some of them cried. Not because they regretted, but because they knew the road ahead would be hard. America had all the equipment, the technology, the comfort. Burkina Faso had little. But still, they were going back. Inside the plane, they looked through the windows as the American sky disappeared behind them. One of them whispered, "We are not running away. We are running back home." Another one said, "This is not failure. This is beginning." And so the story started. A group of young African nurses, who had everything that America could offer, turned their backs on it, and returned to their land. Why did they do it? Because they believed in something bigger than money. They believed in Africa. They believed that healing people in their own country, in their own villages, was worth more than any dollar. They believed that dignity comes not from serving a foreign land, but from building your own. In the end, their decision shocked many people. Some called them foolish. Some called them heroes. But one thing was sure: they were different. They were not like the thousands who left Africa and never looked back. They were part of a new story, a new spirit, a new kind of African. The world did not understand them at first. But history will remember. When the nurses arrived in Ouagadougou, the air felt different. America had been filled with tall buildings, busy streets, and endless electricity. But Burkina Faso carried another kind of power, a raw, unpolished strength that lived inside the people. It was a country that did not have much in material wealth, yet its soil, its history, and its struggle carried something that money could never buy: resilience. The nurses walked through the streets and immediately saw the contrast. There were markets buzzing with sellers and buyers, young children running barefoot, and mothers carrying heavy baskets on their heads. They saw clinics that were small, some without proper beds, some without enough medicine. Yet, at every corner, they also saw faces filled with determination. It was clear to them that this was where they were needed. Not long after their return, word reached Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He had recently taken leadership in a way that shocked much of the world. Traoré was not an old politician trained to bow before Western powers. He was young, bold, and outspoken. His speeches had already started to inspire not just Burkina Faso, but many across Africa. He talked of freedom, dignity, and rebuilding the nation with African strength instead of foreign chains. When he heard that a group of African nurses had left America and returned home, he wanted to meet them. It was not just curiosity, it was recognition. He understood what kind of sacrifice it meant to walk away from comfort in order to serve your own people. The meeting took place in a modest hall in the capital. There was no extravagance, no display of wealth. It was simple. But in that room, the energy was powerful. The nurses sat together, nervous but also excited. They were about to speak with the leader who had captured the imagination of their nation. When Traoré entered, the room fell quiet. He was not dressed in a suit. He wore simple military clothing, and his presence carried authority, but also a surprising humility. He greeted them warmly, like brothers and sisters, not like subordinates. The conversation began slowly. The nurses told him their story, how they studied in America, how the US government had offered them jobs, and how they rejected those offers to return home. They spoke about their desire to use their skills to build the health system of Burkina Faso instead of strengthening a foreign country that already had enough. As they spoke, Traoré listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He let them finish their words. Then he leaned forward and said something that stayed with them forever. He told them, "You could have stayed in America and lived in comfort, but you chose struggle. That choice shows the kind of Africa we are trying to build. We don't need Africans who run away when times are hard. We need Africans who are ready to sweat and bleed for their people. You are not just nurses anymore. You are nation builders." Those words struck deep in their hearts. They had never been called nation builders before. In America, they were only seen as workers. But here, they were being recognized as part of a bigger vision, a bigger dream. From that moment, their mission became clearer. It was not simply about treating patients one by one. It was about laying a foundation for a stronger health system in Burkina Faso. It was about training others, creating opportunities, and spreading knowledge that would last long after they were gone. Traoré shared with them his own dream. He wanted a Burkina Faso that stood on its own feet. A nation that would not always stretch its hands to the West, begging for aid, but instead use its own brains, skills, and resources. He told them that true independence was not only about politics or the military, it was also about healthcare, education, and the basic needs of the people. The nurses found themselves nodding. They understood. They had seen what dependency looked like in America, where Africans were often reduced to cheap labor or skilled workers who filled gaps but were never given full respect. Back home, they had the chance to be more than just employees. They could be leaders of change. Together with Traoré's government, they began to set up programs. They did not wait for billions of dollars or fancy hospitals. They started small but with purpose. They organized mobile clinics to reach villages where people had never seen a professional nurse. They trained local young men and women in basic medical practices, how to give first aid, how to recognize dangerous symptoms, how to handle emergencies before reaching a hospital. The work was not easy. Resources were limited. Sometimes, they lacked equipment. Sometimes, they faced frustration because the problems seemed too big. But every time they looked at the people they were helping, the mothers who survived childbirth, the children who recovered from fevers, the farmers who got treated for wounds, they felt the strength to keep going. Traoré continued to encourage them. Whenever he spoke in public, he mentioned their story. He used them as an example of what true patriotism looked like. He told the nation, "If our brothers and sisters can leave the riches of America to come home and serve us, then what excuse do we have to abandon our own land?" This inspired more young people. Some students who had been dreaming of escaping to Europe started to think differently. Some doctors working abroad began to ask themselves if they too could return. The nurses' decision was becoming more than personal. It was turning into a movement. Step by step, clinics began to improve. They were not transformed into modern American hospitals overnight, but they became cleaner, better organized, and more reliable. Medicine started reaching places that had been neglected for years. People began to feel a new kind of hope. The connection between Traoré and the nurses remained strong. He did not treat them as outsiders or foreigners. He treated them as part of the national struggle. And they, in return, gave their energy with full commitment. In those early months, they realized something important. While America had given them knowledge, it was Burkina Faso that gave them purpose. The long nights of studying in US universities had sharpened their skills, but it was here, in the soil of their homeland, that those skills found true meaning. And so, the partnership between the nurses and Traoré's vision grew. It was not just about medicine. It was about dignity. It was about Africans showing that they could take their future into their own hands. By the time the year ended, the nurses knew that their decision had not been a mistake. It was not the easier path, but it was the right one. And as the world watched Traoré rise as a symbol of African resistance, the nurses stood beside him as living proof that a new generation was ready to sacrifice comfort for the dream of building Africa. They had walked away from America's promises. But in Burkina Faso, they had found something greater, a vision worth fighting for. Time moved forward, and the decision of the nurses began to create ripples far beyond Burkina Faso. What had once looked like a foolish choice now began to look like a historic turning point. Their story spread across villages, towns, and even into neighboring countries. People were speaking about them in homes, in schools, and in government offices. The question was always the same: why would anyone reject America and come back to Africa? And the answer was also the same: because they believed their people deserved better. In the months after their return, the changes in the health system, though small, were impossible to ignore. Clinics that had once been nearly abandoned began to see new life. The nurses organized training sessions for local staff, teaching them modern methods of patient care. They used their knowledge to introduce systems that made it easier to keep track of medicines, to reduce waste, and to make sure that patients were treated quickly instead of waiting endlessly. The results were visible. A mother who once feared childbirth now had skilled hands to support her. Children who fell ill with malaria were treated faster. Farmers who had injuries were cared for before infection spread. Slowly but surely, the health of ordinary people began to improve. But beyond the physical changes, something deeper was happening. The people of Burkina Faso began to feel pride again. For too long, many had believed that progress could only come from outside, from foreign aid, from international organizations, or from experts in Europe and America. Now, they were seeing Africans who had trained abroad return home to use their skills for their own nation. This sparked a new confidence. It told the people, we can build our own future. We do not always need to beg. Ibrahim Traoré recognized this shift and embraced it fully. He understood that real transformation was not only about infrastructure or weapons. It was about mindset. It was about showing the people that they had the power within themselves to create change. Whenever he spoke publicly, he used the nurses as a living example. He would remind the citizens, these are our brothers and sisters. They could have chosen comfort in America, but they chose us. If they can do this, then what is stopping us from also giving back to our nation? What is stopping us from using our skills to lift our people? These words echoed everywhere. Young students began to think differently about their future. Instead of dreaming only about escape routes to Paris or Washington, some started to dream about how they could stay and make something meaningful at home. The nurse's story was quietly rewriting the meaning of success in the hearts of the youth. Meanwhile, the nurses themselves kept working tirelessly. They faced many challenges. Equipment was still scarce, and sometimes medicine was not enough for all the patients. But they learned to be resourceful. They improvised solutions with what they had. They also partnered with local communities, teaching them how to manage health at the grassroots level. One of the most powerful things they achieved was the training of village health workers. These were not fully educated nurses, but ordinary men and women who were willing to learn basic medical practices. With the nurses' guidance, these village health workers could identify dangerous symptoms, provide simple treatments, and know when to send patients to a clinic. This brought healthcare much closer to the people, even in remote areas. As the weeks turned to months, the nurses became more than just professionals. They became symbols. People spoke of them with respect, almost like national heroes. Children looked at them and said, one day, I want to be like them. For women especially, they became proof that African women could rise, learn, lead, and give back without fear. The impact was not only local. Across Africa, their story began to spread. In Ghana, in Nigeria, in Mali, in Senegal, young people heard about the nurses who had walked away from America's bright lights to serve their homeland. Some were inspired to consider doing the same. Some African students studying abroad began asking themselves whether they too could one day return to contribute instead of staying away. The nurses never asked for fame. They did not want to be seen as martyrs or saints. They simply wanted to serve. But whether they liked it or not, their decision had lit a fire across the continent. For Ibrahim Traoré, this was exactly what he had hoped for. He knew that a nation could not be built by one man alone. It required examples that ordinary people could believe in. The nurses gave him that example. They showed that sacrifice was possible, and that hope was not just a speech but a living act. As the first year of their return came to an end, the results were clear. Burkina Faso's health system had not turned into a miracle, but it was stronger, more alive, and more trusted than before. People began to feel that change was possible. And in the wider society, the nurse's story became a moral compass, a reminder that Africa's future would not be handed to it by the West, but built step by Africans themselves. In the end, the true power of their decision was not only in the patients they saved, but in the message they carried. They proved that success was not always measured by money, cars, or foreign houses. Success could be measured by the number of lives saved, by the communities lifted, by the dignity restored. And so, the nurses stood as examples of a new Africa, an Africa that rejects dependency, an Africa that chooses courage over comfort, an Africa that believes in itself. Their choice had once been mocked, but now it was celebrated. Their sacrifice had once been doubted, but now it was honored. They had gone to America to gain knowledge, but they came back to Africa to give purpose. And that purpose grew larger than they ever imagined. History would remember them as more than just nurses. History would remember them as pioneers of a movement, partners in a vision, and proof that when Africans believe in Africa, nothing is impossible.